Hello, everybody, and happy Sunday. Welcome to the 61st episode of Stories of Service, ordinary people who do extraordinary work. And I am the host of Stories of Service, Teresa Carpenter. And I know we had a start time of 2 p.m. EST, but there was those things called time zone changes. So because of that, we are starting a little early, East Coast time. So we are starting at 1 p.m. EST instead. But I have an amazing guest, as I always have, just inspiring guests and people who I have such the honor and pleasure to interview. So I have Jeff Bayless. Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm great. Yeah, thanks, Teresa. We connected very briefly through a mutual friend, and I could tell right away that our headspace was in a similar spot. So I'm very honored to be here, and hopefully, what I'm going to share today is helpful. Like we talked off show in the green room, it's just helpful for even one person, then it's worth the time, and that's kind of what I've been doing here for the last few years. So thank
I
you.
agree. No, absolutely. And I think that it's going to be helpful for a lot more than just one person. So, and I'm going to go through the show notes and read Jeff's bio, and then I'm just going to get right into some questions. I'll probably start off with your Navy background and why you joined. I always like hearing that as it's a story of service. And then I'm going to go into some of the things that you experienced while serving and what you took away from that experience. So, as I had said before, I had a chance to listen to Jeff's story when he was speaking to a Navy command of mostly enlisted sailors in Little Creek. And as I was listening, I was immensely transformed by his raw storytelling style and willingness to take what I felt was like the most tragic and embarrassing experience of his personal life, but turn that into a life lesson that could help others. And today, what we're going to talk about is how he lost his Navy career as an officer, but in the process gained his sanity and life purpose. He is a retired chief boatswain's mate, surface warfare officer, and he has an incredible story of resilience. As he says, we are all in this arena together, and with our passions for helping others, he shares his story and hard-earned wisdom with vulnerability and with humility. We'll be touching on topics today such as divorce, DUI, debt, suicidal ideations, negative coping mechanisms, and ways that to really just help you guys expand your consciousness, notice your feelings, emotions, and around you to better help yourself and help those around you as well. So, with that, Jeff, I'm going to get started. And the first question that I have for you, and my husband just sent me a note, said, Teresa, don't look down. And he's absolutely right. So I need to look at the camera. That's another thing that he likes to do is he likes to editorialize in the comments and
in
other
real
things.
time, right?
Yes, in real time. You really can't beat having a cheerleader like that. But he does say the audio and video are both good, so we are good to go. So
Awesome.
all right. So to get started, where are you from and why did you decide to join the Navy?
Okay, yeah, and that's a very open-ended question. I love open-ended question because it gives me room to kind of explore the thought on my own as well, right? I guess kind of how I start the talks, and it's really just relatable because I think a lot of people join the military either they're trying to better themselves, they're trying to get an education, but for some of us, we're trying to escape a bad environment, right? And that's really why I joined the Navy. It was an escape. It was a way for me to stop waking up in jail. That the life I was living was not productive. It wasn't going anywhere. I just got to a place where my back was against the wall, and I kind of just like an officer and a gentleman, like I got nowhere else to go, man. That really was the truth. I had a pretty rough childhood. I'm very open about it, but I don't know if we have time to get into all the details. But I was sexually abused as a kid by my babysitter's brother when I was very young. Our house got broken into several times. We were in a rough neighborhood. They'd steal our cars, break into our house. My babysitter got tied up at gunpoint with an extension cord. Just you get all these little T trauma things that just kind of, stack. And then, you start developing these negative coping mechanisms. For me, it was, just ridiculous, fighting drugs, alcohol, and like I said, I'm not proud of any of this, right? And like, I'll talk about hubris in a little bit, I'm sure, but, I was just kind of like, I didn't care if I lived or died. I remember one time I was at the top of the stairs at our house in Houston, Texas. And my dad was like, Jeff, do you even care if you die? And I was like, no, I really don't. Not at this point in my life. Like I was 18 years old. I dropped out of high school. I got a GED. I'm working at a restaurant. I couldn't hold a job, just really, really rough times, and really what it was is I just hadn't processed anything that was trauma at that time. Right. And
Right.
There's also a part that I've learned through therapy, and I'm sure we'll get into that, that basically I lacked the nurturing role in my childhood. I never had a nurturer. Basically for the majority of my childhood, it was kind of like
On
you
your
do
own.
the thing. Yeah, right. Yeah, latchkey kid, right? Um,
Yeah.
so I got to a point where I was just like, this is not a way to live. This is a way to die. And like I said, my back was against the wall, and so I decided to join the Navy. My father was a boatswain, my grandfather was a boatswain, and I figured, you know, if they can do it, maybe this will work for me, and maybe it'll clean my life up and give me some sense of purpose. But also, I was just extremely desperate, to be honest.
Did you have anybody around you, like friends, parents, or people you were dating, or not even really dating, but maybe just hanging out with, as I did in my case? Or because I was in a very partying lifestyle myself,
Hmm.
and when you're hanging around those kind of people, the idea of joining the military is just completely foreign. I mean, did you say
Absolutely.
you're from a military town?
Well, Houston, Texas. I
Yeah,
mean,
kind
I,
of.
I mean, it's definitely a red state, right? So definitely
Sure.
support the military and stuff like that. But no, I think for me, it was just really out of desperation. I think also, like you alluded to, you are who you surround yourself with, right? And so I surrounded myself with other kids that didn't really have a whole lot of nurturing and structure in their life,
Right.
right? They were also kind of latchkey kids, kind of doing their own thing, working to pay their own bills. I mean, I moved out of my house when I was 17,
I did as
right?
well.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and it was just I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, and
Right.
so yeah, at that point, no, of course, none of those people were
No.
pushing me to join the military, but I just I couldn't do it anymore. Um, and I have to give my mom a little credit. And it took me 6 months to join the Navy, also, and I could not get in today with the drug waivers, the GED, the record that I had even at 17 years old. I had a assault bodily injury charge, got in a fight. Just it was a blessing, and so I think when I joined boot camp, I took it very seriously.
Mhm.
I knew that this was kind of my last shot, and I did well in boot camp. I got meritoriously promoted to E2. I don't know if they still do that anymore, but I have OCD diagnosed, so that part was easy, right? Like marching, flanking, tying, putting your neck,
Yeah, you it
like
made sense to you, all that
all
kind
that
of
stuff
stuff.
was easy. Yeah, it came
Mhm.
natural. Making your rack in 2 minutes, no problem. Like my 45s were tight. That part was easy for me.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I took it really seriously from then on, I think.
Yeah, so you started off and did you joined as a boatswain's mate, right? Is that what you enlisted as? Or were you
I was an undesignated seaman.
undesignated seaman?
Yeah, because
Okay.
of my background, I had three. Well, it's kind of a funny story. So I did pretty well in the ASVAB, and they were like, "Oh man, maybe we should give this guy the nuke test and see if he wants to be a nuke." And then they're like, "Oh no, look at all these waivers for this guy."
Waivers, yeah.
Yeah. So seaman, airman, or fireman were my choices, and so I was an undesignated seaman until
Mhm.
I got to my first ship.
Okay. So you're moving along, and tell me a little bit about your enlisted career, and then we'll transition to your officer career. Like overall, I mean, obviously you picked up officer, and we'll talk more about that later. But how would you characterize those years of enlisted time?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the military has definitely evolved, mostly for the better, I would say. But in those times, it was kind of a rough and tumble, alpha male type environment, right? Especially as a bosun on an amphib ship.
Yep.
Uh, and I was drinking that Kool-Aid wholeheartedly. And I went to my first ship, USS Pellew, LHA 5, right before 9/11. My first deployment. We were in Darwin, Australia when 9/11 went down. And so I had a lot of time underway on that deployment after 9/11, obviously. And I just focused on getting qualified, and I was constantly reading tech manuals and pubs and books, and not self-help books, not philosophy books, not
Mhm.
anything that's going to better me as a human, but just really getting smart on my trade, my MOS, my job in the Navy, right? And I
Mhm.
got qualified, welded control. I got qualified, on the anchor, on the boats, on the davit, everything. Even if it wasn't in my division, I got qualified in it just because I wanted to advance. Uh, and so I made second class there. I was the ALPO, work center soup, number one EP, did pretty well. And then I
Mhm.
transferred to I say this when I do my talks, and it's like, every Texan is a diehard Texan. I mean, some people are from, the Ohio State, and they're, proud of that. But I think there's something different about the
I see,
Republic
yes.
state of Texas, where people are just like,
Ugh.
God bless Texas, right? So I
I
wanted
don't
to
know
go
though, I'm
back.
from Columbus and I'm from the Ohio State, so, there's
Well,
definitely a
they
culture
challenge
there.
it. Yeah, yeah. But I wanted to go back to Texas really bad. So back then, the only shore duty that boatsmains could do that was in Texas was security. So I was a master at arms technically for about 2.5 years there, and I was supposed to go there just to work in the security boats. But eventually, they brought me out of the boats, and I started doing watch commander duties, which is basically like an LPO of a section, right? A watch section. Uh, so I did that for a couple of years. During this time, I married. I had a wife before that didn't work out. It was very quick. I don't say anything negative about her. We just were too young and just didn't know what we were
Mhm.
doing. So we were only married for about 2.5 years. Most of that time we spent like basically partying. So we didn't really get to know each other very well.
Right.
And then I'd gotten married again, had a son, got my associate's degree. Got that GED that chip off my shoulder, the GED. Right now, I've got like some type of education. I made first class. I think I made first class in 7 or 8 years. No, yeah, because I was only first class for 18 months, so I made first class in like 6.5 years or something like that, 7 years. Um, and then I did that. I was doing well there too. Number one EP, good. Doing pretty well. It's
You're just,
they
like, chasing success, it sounds like success after
absolutely.
success. You were just chasing this high, which I can relate to, of needing that next thing, that next qual, that next eval. Gotta score here, gotta do this, gotta do
Oh,
that.
love trophies, trophy
Mhm.
bucks from hunting or trophies in the Navy, whatever trophy I could get would give me validation, right? And
Mhm.
prove that I was, worthy of, somebody's admiration, right? That was the thing at the time. And
Right.
so, or, quite honestly, to make my dad proud or to make my parents proud or to, somebody say that that kid really turned his stuff around. Um, so I did pretty well there. And then, I terminated shore duty early. I wanted to go back to a ship. I got hooked up with a pre-com, USS Stockdale out of Bath, Maine. I built that ship. If anybody's ever pre-commed a ship, the cool thing about that is you really are. First of all, it was USS Stockdale. So Admiral James Stockdale, like what a great story. What a great namesake, right? Like that guy was
Mm, yeah.
a hero,
Mhm.
truly a hero. And so I was super proud of that and just had a lot of pride in that ship. I went there as a young BM1. Uh, there were 3 BM1s on that ship, and there really shouldn't have been. There should have only been one. But I did pretty well.
Mhm.
Made chief there. While I was going through chief's initiation, I had my LDO package in because I always looked up to the bosuns on my ship, this Peleliu. They were like the guys, they were in charge of all the
Oh, yeah.
evolutions. Anything dangerous that was going on the ship, they were in charge of it. And I was like, you know, that's
Oh,
what I
yeah.
want to do. Like these guys are,
They're the
you know,
gods of the flight deck.
exactly. Well, yeah, on that well deck for that ship, but yeah,
Or
flight
well
deck
deck,
on
yeah.
the
Yep,
DDG too. Yep.
yep.
So yeah, and I just kind of like the swagger of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, I put in an LDO package. I didn't think I was going to get picked up. I was pretty young. I made chief in 8 years. I'm thinking, there's no way, but I can at least submit these packages, and then it'll start. They'll just see that I'm serious about it. After 3 or 4 or 5 attempts. Well, I got selected the first time as an LDO. Excuse me. So then, back then LDOs could get SWO pins, surface warfare officer pins. That was my number one goal. It was to go back to a ship so I could go get a surface warfare officer pin. Uh, Meanwhile, at no time am I, asking my family what's right, trying to develop any kind of balance in life or uh, better myself in any way except for professionally, right? Uh,
Right.
I would say, at that time I did, I tried to get my education and, I'm doing well in school and, in my professional life in the Navy. I did cut back immensely on like the partying lifestyle, stuff like that. I had kids now, I started uh, running 5Ks and stuff just to try to get healthy and get my life
Mhm.
together a little bit more. But I still wasn't there yet, right? And I don't know if we ever really get there, right? We're always on this constant journey of evolution, right? Trying to
Of
trying to
course.
better ourselves and those
Yeah.
around us. But I was trending in the right direction, is what I usually say, right?
On paper. Yeah.
On paper, yes. So I got to my first ship. Man, if I was drinking the Kool Aid before, I was really drinking it now. It's like, give me an IV drip of Kool Aid. Hoo-yah Navy. I'm still very,
Yeah,
I don't mean that in a pejorative manner
I
against the
know.
Navy. I love the Navy. But I just went, I over identified as a bosun in the Navy. And so basically, I volunteered for everything on that ship. I was MOGAS officer, crane officer, well control officer, D-bar control officer, officer of the deck, command duty officer, aviation facilities coordinator. I owned all the yellow gear.
You were the
You name
go-to
it.
guy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's the main battery of that ship is the bosun, right? So it's
Mhm.
basically like Captain, XO, Chang, and bosun. We're like the guys that, because of the nature of the operations at those types of ships. I was an LSD. I don't know if I said that, but USS Kill. And what a great command. Like I had a really good time, met a lot of really good people. Definitely learned a lot about my job, but I didn't learn a lot about myself yet. And this is kind of, I think, when the hubris started to set in, right? This is when I'm really like, wow, I'm the man, right? Everybody's looking up to me. People are saluting me. I'm getting all this, I'm doing all these crazy evolutions, right? We deployed to South America, did a H-80R mission and captured all this. I'm in like centerfold of the Navy Times, like slinging barrels of cocaine, bales of cocaine, like, and all of this is just like really fueling my ego and really just making me overly proud of myself, right? And overly cocky. And I was like, I'm the man. Nothing can hold me back. And people in my community were trying to set me up because I was doing the right thing. So they were trying to set me up. I say this very humbly, but I had the legs, I had the tenure, I had the ability, the capability to make captain. I'm not saying I would have. I might have only been a lieutenant commander or commander, but I had the time if I did the right jobs, and that was my goal. Was '06. That was absolutely '06 at 38. I'm not going to revert to SWO to try to get the extra 2 years to make it to 40. I wanted to retire as a captain, deck LDO at 38 years old. That was the goal. And nothing was going to get in the way of that goal. But then something did get in the way of that goal.
Right.
So my wife and I at that time, again, I don't say anything negative about my wife. I just own my part of it, right? Like I keep my side of the street clean. I just own my part of it. But we were not doing well. Probably would have been smarter for me to take some time off. I had been at sea for quite a while, multiple deployments. And even when I wasn't doing that, I was training for athletic events that, were giving me more validation, more trophies, right? More things to put on the wall, more justification of how I deserve to be loved and appreciated and recognized, right? That this is all I need. This is my drug of choice at this point, right?
Yep. It does become like an addiction. It really does.
Absolutely. Yeah. So then I basically lied to my wife at the time and said, like, there's no shore duty available. I'm going to this aircraft carrier on the East Coast because that's the next block that I need to check, right? So I got to that ship, and boy, it was like, here's your warm your oven up because here's a slice of humble pie. Like I know you're an LDO, but guess what? We got a lot of those here. Like, we need you to stand some quarterdeck watch, Jeff. I was like, no, you don't understand. Like I was the bosun. I'm like an LDO. They're like, yeah, cool story. Like we're all LDOs and warrants here. Like whatever, dude.
Right.
So honestly, I was young and immature, and I didn't take well to that. And that really, I wasn't exactly happy on that ship. And I don't blame anybody on that ship. It was a great command. It was all on me. I just wasn't ready to eat that humble pie yet.
You weren't ready to be the low man on the totem pole because you had spent so many years working to get to that place. And then all of a sudden you get, and I think you said it was your carrier, right? Your carrier
Yep.
tour. And you
Mm-hmm.
get to this ginormous carrier with, 3,500 people that are ship's company. And you're just one of many. I mean, in a huge wardroom
Oh yeah.
of, O5s and O4s, and you're just a lowly O1. And
Well,
that's
O2E, but yeah, you're
O2E,
right.
sorry.
It didn't
Yeah.
matter. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could have been an
Right.
O4 and I still would have been a junior officer on that ship. Like it didn't matter. Yeah.
Right.
Um, and shame on me for not recognizing that or not knowing that before I went there. But it probably was, and I'll get to it at the end, but it's probably the best thing that could ever happen to me, honestly, as a human. Maybe not in my professional career, but as a human, it's the best thing I could have. The adversity teaches you the hard lessons, right?
It does.
So I got there. I was trying, driving that aircraft carrier. We were about to go on deployment. It's a long story, and I'm happy to share like the gruesome details, but it's not really important. What is important is I got in a fight with my wife at the time, operated a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol. because one of those negative coping mechanisms I was talking about was, excessive alcohol and, escapism, right? So when things got hard, I wouldn't want to deal with it or talk about it. I would just escape. So, hop in the truck, peel the tires, get out of there, right? Got in an accident. The accident, it's not super important, but what I would say, if I'm just trying to own my part of it, is whether or not it was my fault. Had I been completely sober, I could have avoided the accident, right? So it doesn't matter who was at fault. If I had had my wits about me, no matter who crossed the line, right? Because
Or
there's
yeah, who hit who? Yep.
right. The point is, if I could have averted it had I had my wits about me. So I own my part of that, right? I don't care. I don't place blame on who hit who or what happened. What happened was I operated a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol and got in an accident. So reported to the ship. The very next day, told the command duty officer, who happened to be my first lieutenant, hey, I got a DUI last night, and now the battle is on, right? Um, First thing that happened is I couldn't operate a motor vehicle on base for a year. That wasn't, you didn't have to be, convicted. It was just automatic. Um, Second thing is they withheld my promotion to lieutenant. I was a lieutenant junior grade, about to put on 03, and that was put on hold with PERS. And then I was basically facing a board of inquiry and a detached for cause. The I don't know how much explanation I need to give to that. Sometimes I over explain, but basically, going to court to get kicked out of the Navy, and I'm getting kicked off the ship, right? That's what I'm facing. So then we deploy. My wife and I, my second marriage was failing, and this was kind of the nail in the coffin. So I'm on deployment. I'm $40,000 in debt. I weigh about 145 pounds. I'm 185 now, 180, 185, right? So I'm
How did
severe.
you get all the debt? Just out of curiosity. How
Well,
did
the
you
lawyers,
Oh, from getting the DUI. Okay.
yeah, like I had to buy a
Went
new
through a lot.
truck,
Yeah.
the
Yep.
court fees.
Yep.
Plus, I just wasn't that smart with money at that time, because I wasn't like focused on. I talk a lot about this, but it's all connected. Like everything is a balance wheel, right? It's just like any spoke in the wheel that gets bent. Well, now you're out of balance, right? And now the wheel is wobbly, and you're not getting where you're supposed to get, as safely and as effectively and efficiently as you could, right? So at this point in my life, I was so over rotated on deployment and work and Navy that I wasn't worried about what I spent money on. Like if I needed a new bicycle for these athletic events that I was doing, or if I need like I just wasn't smart about it. I wasn't very frugal in some of those areas of my life because I wasn't really worried about how I was going to retire, how I was going to take care of my kids. I was worried about myself, right? And but yeah, a lot of it was court fees, lawyer fees, stuff like that. So $40,000 in debt, 140 pounds, facing the board of inquiry, detached for cause. I'm driving an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Persian Gulf. And, like literally, I describe it like being in a pressure cooker. And if somebody had just let a little bit of the vent out, it would have really helped. But at every turn, it was like just more bad news, more bad news, more bad news. And so I'm contemplating suicide every day. Didn't really talk to anybody about it. I talk about this a lot. It's share your wounds with those you trust, share your scars with the world. And so at that time, these were all like really gaping
I like
wounds,
that.
right?
Share your
Yeah, I don't
wounds
know
with
where
those you
that's not original.
trust,
I
and
heard that.
share your scars with the world. That's,
Yeah.
I've never heard that before. That's profound. It's true,
So
though.
I didn't share my wounds with anybody. I compartmentalized, right? And then I talk a lot about negative coping mechanisms. I think some of that athletic event stuff, or I took it to the extreme, right? Because I was a hard guy to piss off after a hard run or something like that back then. My body won't let me do that now, but back then that was like one of my coping mechanisms that I could lean on, right, at the time, because of everything that was going on. It just really helped. I think there's something too with like the dopamine, serotonin release when
Oh, yeah.
when you do stuff like that. But anyway, so I'm contemplating suicide, not talking to anybody about it, and then I've got to go through like DAPA. I've got to go through VSAP, which is like the Virginia thing for getting your license back. I ended up not being able to drive for 2 years. But long story short, I basically just tried to grit and bear. One good thing that came out of this time is I just started reading a lot of books, a lot of Stoic philosophy. And the other thing that came out of this is my wife at the time started to show me unconditional love. Or I'm sorry, my current wife, who was a friend at the time, started showing me this like unconditional love, right? Like I didn't feel worthy of love, and at this point, I felt as low as possible, and she just kind of loved me anyway, like I was, some pup off the street that she rescued. Um, so I did get DFC'd off that ship, but before
Detached for
that,
cause. Yep.
yep. So
Mhm.
before that, I flew back to uh, Norfolk area, Hampton Roads area, pled guilty to the DUI, got divorced, flew back to the ship, awaited the board of inquiry decision, awaited the detached for cause decision. Cliff Notes version: the captain did not um, recommend that I show cause for a board of inquiry, but he did recommend that I get detached for cause.
So what does that mean, to people that are not in the military? The captain of the ship recommended what, and then somebody else said what?
So the captain makes the recommendation to the first flag, right, in the chain of command, the first flag admiral, uh, to not show cause, which means I would not have to go to basically like it's a step just below a court martial, right?
Mhm.
It's
Okay.
not a jury or a judge. It's just some active duty senior enlisted senior officer people that make the decision on, if you are retainable or not. So he makes the recommendation, but the flag can turn around and say, nope, that's conduct unbecoming of an officer. This guy's gonna this guy's gonna go, explain himself. I think a lot of that had to do with my record at the time too. You know, I I don't know, throughout this whole process. I think a lot of people say, see lawyers, right? Like people were telling me things. Uh, there's no pigeon. There's no like
No,
singular answer. It's not the same
no,
for everybody.
no, it's not. It's
There's
absolutely not.
a lot of nuance. There's a lot of personalities. There's a lot of backstory. There's a lot of, everybody's different. Everybody's journey is different. Everybody's background is different. Who briefs your package is different, right? Like it's all it's so nuanced and it's so subjective. There really is not a black and white answer to what happens when an officer gets a
Right. When
DUI.
an officer gets a DUI, there's no cookie cutter solution of what your or not solution, but or adjudication that's going to happen. If this happens, you will get this. So I'm tracking it. So your commanding officer says you don't have to show cause or prove yourself before a sort of a board, but then it goes up to your strike group admiral. Is
Right.
that who goes? Okay. And then
Yep.
what did the strike group admiral say?
He concurred,
Okay.
DFC. So basically kicked me off the ship. He lost confidence in my ability to lead sailors on his ship,
Right.
which I agree with. That was not conduct becoming of an officer, right?
Right.
And how can I tell sailors, to do the right thing when I wasn't doing the right thing, right? You can't. I had a captain. I love telling the story. And he's a 2-star now and a great mentor. But we were at captain's mess one time. A sailor of mine had gotten in trouble, and I said, well, she's a really good sailor. This was just kind of a one-off thing. And he said, well, I would argue that she's not a good sailor if she's doing this out in town, in her off time, right? Because you're a sailor 24/7, right? So how can I say that I was a good officer when when I'm off, I'm not, you know,
Hmm.
conduct becoming of an officer. So some guys were really trying to help me out. I don't name drop or anything, but some senior deck LDOs in my community were basically they knew that I was a pretty sharp guy, but just made a mistake that probably could have happened to some of them at that time, right?
Sure.
So they tried to help me out. They brought me to Naval Beast Group 2, where I did basically amphibious operations, right? I was a staff officer, and at this point, I'm fighting for my promotion to O3. And the reason that's important is if I don't make O3, you can't retire as an O2. You have to make O3 to get to 20 years. And so basically, it's not just fighting for my promotion, it's fighting to stay in the Navy again, only just with a different set of rules,
So
right?
were you fighting to just stay an O3 so that you could retire, or was there still a chance that even though you were detached from the carrier, that you could still be retained and go on and make O4, O5, O6?
I mean, that was the goal. Absolutely.
Okay, so at
Yeah.
that point, you're at Naval Beach Group 2, and you think, okay, I deserve to not be on the ship anymore and have sailors serve under me, but I'm getting another chance at this new place. And you think in your mind anyway that there's still a chance that you can move forward and move past this. Am I correct?
Yeah. And that's what people are telling
Okay.
me.
Right.
And that's what people in the community, that's what people at PERS, like everybody's saying, well, I knew this one guy that He got a
Right.
DUI and they passed him up the first time, but he selected the second time. Or, he
Sure.
he did get tasked for cause, but he's an '05 now. Like, okay, cool story. That's not how it worked out for me, obviously. Um, but so I got to beach group. That was a really great job. Like, I really enjoyed the work. It was very important. We did a ball tops, and obviously with what's going on, not to get into politics, but like what's going on with Russia, that's exactly why we do ball tops, right? So uh, that was good. I felt like I had purpose. I
Mhm.
say at my first look for '03, it was denied because I didn't have very much in that package. There wasn't. I'd gotten a promotable fit rep, which is, right in the middle, which I got to give the captain. He should have given me a lower evaluation, right? But I didn't have much going into that package trying to promote. So then I decided I was just going to do everything humanly possible. So I jumped on everything: ball tops, bold alligator. If a ship was doing like a Com2X or exercises and operations, like I did whatever was out there. I grabbed it. If somebody didn't want to go, do a beach op, I got it. Like, I'll be out there. And what's funny is let me lighten it up a little bit. Like, I couldn't drive, right? So I'm riding my bicycle in Hampton Roads with like a sea bag with my uniform in the back out to the beach at like 4 o'clock in the morning, which is like 20 miles away, in order to make H hour, just so I can, like, at the time the Commodore was like, he was tasking me to go all these places. And at one point the cause had said to him, like, he can't drive, right? Like, he's riding his bicycle all these places, man.
Just
So
making it you were just making it happen. Yeah,
yeah,
and
what are
you wanted to stay in the Navy, and you wanted to continue to serve, and you were gonna do everything that you could just to demonstrate, and for most people out there that may not know this, O3 is normally automatic. Like, it's
right?
just part of the progression of your rank that you make O3, but the fact that yours was getting held back tells me that they were looking at these things in your record, and they were making determinations based on where you were and
Yep.
what had happened,
So I
correct?
submitted my
Mhm.
that's right. I submitted my second package. I had a lot in that. 5.0, which is the max fit rep possible. I had a couple of those. I'm not a 5.0 sailor. I was not a 5.0 officer. This again was people trying to help me out,
Trying to help
right?
you out. Yep.
They just knew that that would help pad the package. I had it. They put me in for a Navy Accommodation Medal, just for like a deployment that I did, just to try to help me out, just to get something like, look, this guy's bouncing back, like, he's working hard, he's doing
Right.
all this operational stuff, and so strongest possible package going forward for that, and that came back denied. Uh, so basically, it said, thank you for your service. You're getting out, and I can't. They definitely kind of expedited my package to ensure that, or this is, you should never make an assumption, right? But my assumption is that they ran it through a little bit quicker, because if I had hit 18 years, my understanding is that I would have had some sort of sanctuary, right?
Oh,
Um,
just to stay in as an officer and get the officer retirement versus what ended up happening, which you're about to talk about. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. So high three is not always true.
Mhm.
um, so
Interesting.
yeah, so I called around and it was very difficult. It was quite arduous. I learned a lot about the personnel and how that stuff works in Millington, but unfortunately, I submitted a package to request to revert back to chief petty officer, and I was forced retired at 20 years. Not could not promote to senior chief. Some people say I should have reverted back to senior chief. That was not the case. Some people say I should have been able to, put in a warrant package. That was not the case. I was not promotable. I was reverted to chief, and I was forced retired at 20 years. That's exactly any other story that has been told, or is, I'm happy for them that worked out that way for them. That's not how it worked out for me, and I was crushed. I was devastated. Uh, I should say I am very grateful for this experience. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to serve. I'm grateful that they let me retire. I'm grateful to continue to serve as a civil servant now for the Navy. Much gratitude, much humility. But if I'm being objectively
Sure.
speaking, it crushed me,
Of
and
course, and in the
it was
moment, you're not thinking about all these things you're grateful for and what you're gonna walk away with at the moment. You're thinking, "I just launched this huge fight, and there's not the resolution that I was hoping for." And we had a couple comments. I definitely wanna get to them. Rodney Robinson, he just said, "Would you like to list the quotes after the show?" The quote you said about the wounds and scars,
oh
really
yeah.
really did, resonate with a few people. And then Rodney Robinson said, not a good sailor because you're a sailor 24/7. That's good. Preacher's sermon was along the same lines this morning. And yeah, it's a tough balance because we all make mistakes and we all deserve second chances. And so how do you balance that with holding people accountable? And
Yeah.
it's definitely it's a hard line.
Well, and
To
again, it's a like I said in the bio or in the intro, it's these negative coping mechanisms, because all of the pressure that was, I say this often, and I think it's true. And at least, that's what my therapist tells me, which I've recently reached back out to go back to therapy because I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop at all times.
That's
But
where the anxiety kicks in. Yep, yep.
yeah. So you just, you get this like trauma, and it's just compounding trauma over years, right? It's not like, so for some people, it probably is one singular event. They were in battle, right? And, they got shot, or that, they have survivor's guilt. I've talked to many people like that. But I think for most of us, it's just a little bit of childhood trauma, maybe a lot of childhood trauma, then some trauma in service, maybe you saw some bad stuff, or was, forced into the pressure cooker. I mean, just driving an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Persian Gulf alone, it takes years off the end of your life. You know what I mean? And then you go through something like this, where like everything you've identified as, everything you've worked for, everything you believe yourself to be, I'm a human doing, not a human being, right? The only thing that I'm resonating with is things that I'm doing. At no
Yeah, that
time
your
was
whole
I,
identity was attached to that.
absolutely. Yeah. And so when that gets stripped away, boy, it hurts, and then again, with your back against the wall, you have two choices. You can either lay down and, what is that? There's like a Spartan saying, it's like,
Another quote.
come,
Yes.
come back on your shield, come home with your shield, or come back on it. Right. So it's like, if
Come home
don't,
with your shield or come back on it.
yeah.
Okay.
Like, so you better die in battle or come back, a hero. That's the only two options. Right. So, it's kind of like we talk about the Ryan Holiday stuff before, the obstacle is the way. That really helped me out, because through this like adversity, I was trying to think to myself, what can this teach me? Right. What
Mm.
can I do?
What's
Uh,
the meaning? What was the meaning for this? Why did this happen? Right?
so then I started doing the public speaking, and I started really opening up. I really started talking to just anybody that, was going through something. Like, it really removed any judgment I might have had on somebody before. Right. Like, it's not for me to judge. That's for, the universe, your maker, the God, whatever your belief is. My purpose is to just share and try to help, as many people that I just try to bring people with me, like, I'm not saying I'm enlightened, but I learned a lot from this process. And so I started doing the public speaking for about 2 years, and that was like on active duty, and that was like really rewarding, and very cathartic, to be able to vulnerably share, quite honestly, where I made huge mistakes and how I was a huge failure. But I was in the arena, and
Yeah.
we're in the arena. Nobody gets out of this human experience alive, right? And we're all going through our own trials and tribulations. And so I think I just learned around that time to, humble myself, and to not worry about what people think or promoting or anything like that. Just try to do good and hope that karmic energy will return to me. And
Were
I'll
you
probably say it has.
That's amazing. Were you scared that that last 2 years on active duty, like your first public speaking event, if you can take us back to that, had you had some therapy at this point to understand how to
Absolutely.
process this? I mean, I'm just
Yeah.
trying to think in my mind, like you've got 2 years left of your service. Nobody talks about this stuff publicly, especially people who have, like myself, who, I mean, and I've said this before. I mean, I've had a DUI and I still haven't really shared the full story of it. And nobody ever talks about these kinds of things, especially childhood trauma. That's another thing no one likes to talk about.
Yeah.
And so how did you get the courage those first initial times to do this and to think like you could there was nobody else, you didn't have anybody to look to who was active duty, who was doing something similar in the same position.
That's
So
right.
how yeah, so what was it that caused you to do it?
I think sometimes there's just like this, something starts as a spark and then it becomes like an overwhelming burn, right? And it was just, it's kind of a snowball effect, right? And I did it in a small command once, and I didn't really share my suicidal ideations. And then, a little bit later, I was like, okay, well, let me open up a little bit more. I also read a book that was very helpful that kind of shifted my perspective, called The Mask of Masculinity, right? And I think a lot of times, men
Mm,
specifically, we wear these masks. I mean, a lot of people wear masks. So that's not specific to men, but the mask of masculinity is specific to men. And I wore a very sturdy mask for a lot of years. And at a certain point, I think after you go through enough stuff and after you've contemplated killing yourself for, 5 years straight, day in, day out, like after a while, you're just like, why, and why hold this back? Like, why keep it with me?
Mhm.
If I can help somebody not have to go through what I went through, that was my motivation. If I can, and I get emotional because like it happens all the time. Like somebody will just reach out and say, "Hey, man, like that was really helpful, and I'm going through this thing, and so I'm gonna reach out for therapy, or I'm gonna call my wife and tell her I'm sorry, or just whatever the thing is, or when I get that one person, I mean, sometimes it's a dozen, but even if it's just one person that reaches out and says, "Hey, man, like me too, you're not alone," and it was tough, but seeing that you made it through and that you're on the other side somewhat, uh, it's helpful, and
It is.
it helps inspire me, like other people inspire me to want to be helpful, if that makes sense.
It does, and it sounds like you did it gradually, you know? You started with a little bit of your story, and then it just kind of built into where it is now, where you're able and you're comfortable sharing a larger portion of your story. And this goes right back to why I started the podcast, Stories of Service, because I do believe that when we share our stories, we help others and we elevate public consciousness on issues that are dark and deep and buried and people think are shameful. And what you've done by sharing this story is you've shown that it's not shameful and that we all have these wounds. And again, I had somebody else said something that probably will kind of go along with this. And Russell Sauer, he says, the mental scars build to a point that the mechanisms we've used to survive to date eventually fail us. The layers of trauma build and break us down quietly, and it sneaks up on us. He says he was going to tap
Oh,
out
wow.
back in 2019, 9 years post retirement. And it's
I'm
so
glad you
true.
didn't.
It's so
Yeah.
true.
I don't
It's
think
like,
we ever really arrive either, right? Like that's kind of what I'm learning anyway. I thought maybe at some point that maybe, I mean, maybe it gets easier, you just get more coping mechanisms, but you never really get out of the arena, right? It's just
no.
it's just a different set of uh, issues, right? A different set of things that you're going to have to go through. And the best thing I think we can do is educate ourselves and then try to educate others, right? A rising tide lifts all boats, and so if you know this stuff is not something to be embarrassed about, because a lot of people are going and suffering in silence and doing the same thing. And
I
I don't
agree.
I
No,
don't know that I'm the best resource, and I'm not a therapist. But sometimes it's just helpful, like to know that you're not alone, right? Like there are other people that are doing. I don't even think, to be quite honest, I don't even think my story is that tragic compared to some other stories I've heard. Right?
sure.
There are people that are still being sexually abused today. And I
Yeah.
could look at that and say, oh, well, mine was just when I was a kid. So like, why is at 41 years old, is it still something that's hanging me up? And I think we talked about this when we had coffee when you're here in Hampton Roads, but it's like one person's level of trauma may be a 12-ounce bottle, and the other
Mhm.
person's level of trauma may be a 32-ounce bottle. But no matter what, when that bottle overflows, it's overflowing. It's
Right.
that you are now in a negative cope. You're in the dark space, right? You're in the red zone. And for me, how that manifests in my body, this is something also. Now I know I'm kind of rambling, but uh,
No, no, you're not. I'm listening. And I'm
what's I think, like, noticing, first thing is noticing what's coming up for you, right? A lot of times, at least for me, it was about compartmentalizing things and stuffing them down, or finding other ways, working out, drinking, fighting. Uh, some people it's gambling, some people it's sex, whatever the thing is, or food, whatever, right? I was finding a way to cope that wasn't healthy because I wasn't processing things, because I wasn't noticing them. So thing one is like notice it, right? Thing two is then process it. And if you can't, you know, if you get to a point where you're not processing things helpfully or skillfully, which is what happens for me, my armpits sweat, my chest gets tight, and I'll find myself in a panic attack.
yeah.
Uh, and panic attacks are scary, man, because you don't know what's going on. Like you feel like maybe you're having a heart attack, or like, you're over, like sometimes I can't breathe. I have to go outside, get fresh air. Um, I know I'm not alone with that. I
You're
know
not
that
alone. You're
I
not
didn't
alone.
even know what a panic attack was, and I was probably having them for years. You know
Right.
what I mean? I was just like, nah, I don't know. Panic attack. That's for sissies. Like, not
Right.
not me.
That
That, I
that's
was
when your
just
your
I was just
body's
a
just
little nervous.
had it with all the trauma that's been buried, and it just manifests into this big ginormous freak out session. I don't know if I get full blown panic attacks. I go down stressful rabbit holes, and my friends
Mhm.
can attest to this. Where I'll get my mind set on something, and it's all I think about, and then I have to like text all my girlfriends and try to work out in my mind how I'm going to solve some big problem that I just overthink about, and then I just
Mhm.
sit there and just dwell on it and obsess, and I just have all this anxiety over it. And so you're definitely not alone. These feelings are normal. They're real. They're like you said, they're a result of years and years of not processing things and needing to just get through day to day. Because day to day, there's so many logistical decisions and surface level things that you just have to do to get through your day, and it's
Yeah.
very difficult to make space to process these really deep emotions.
Yep.
And if you don't have someone to do that with, like you said, a therapist, a trusted friend, um, and sometimes your spouse isn't always going to be the right person to
Yeah.
take on all these emotions and all these feelings. And so I applaud you for not only sharing your story, but being so forthright about seeking a therapist or another way to process these feelings. And I agree with you about being in the arena. This never ends. I've come
Mhm.
to the conclusion that I'm going to be 70 years old and I'm still going to be processing things, and I'm
Mhm.
still going to be dealing with stressful situations, and I'm still going to have probably anxiety and issues about things and sort of certain hangups. I just don't think those things ever end. And I think that we as a society, we want to just move on and say we've dealt with our grief and our pain and now we've moved on. But I don't think that's the way life works.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about when I was hearing you, talk about reaching out to other people. One thing that came up for me was like this sense of community, right? The blue zones, they talk about it. Like people that live to be 100 years old, they there were a lot of things like diet, exercise, where they lived, access to transportation, stuff like that, access to healthcare. But the number one thing was community. There's another book Sebastian Younger wrote about tribe. It's basically the same thing. Having a sense of community, someone you can talk to, someone you trust. And then another thing that came up for me was, you were talking about anxiety and how it manifests in your body, right? So it's like the body keeps the score is a good one. I think his name is Dr. Vandal Cook. I'm messing it up. It's a complicated name, but Body Keeps the Score. And then I just read by Gabor Mate, When the Body Says No. And it's basically the same stuff. It's just you get over rotated on stuff, or you go down the rabbit hole on something. For me, it's like I always expect the worst possible scenario, right? Because I've seen the worst possible scenario, right? Like I've repeatedly had so many bad things that this is what I've come to expect that my experience is supposed to be like. And rationally, objectively, I can say that's not true, Jeff. Like that's not,
Right.
that's
Your
not
thinking
true.
brain can say that, but not your
Absolutely.
emotional brain. Yeah.
Right. Right. And so you can manifest even like illness in your body through this over rotating at all times.
Mhm.
So mindfulness practice is very helpful. I'll just be, honest, like sometimes the SSRIs were helpful. Sometimes they weren't,
Mhm.
sometimes uh, I think it kind of comes in ebbs and flows too. Like I'll go, a year where I'm like, okay, maybe not a full year, but I'll go like nine,
Yeah.
10 months and I'm like, okay, I'm good. Like everything's good. I'm not. And then all of a sudden something will trigger and now I'm back in
Back where you
therapy
were.
for yeah, and I'm back
Yeah.
in therapy for another 12 sessions, and I feel better again, right? And then, things kind of go back to homeostasis. And my
Mhm.
point is not to make it about me, or, woe is me or pity party or anything like that. It's just, again, we're all going through this. Like you're not alone. Like, there's so many people out here experiencing trauma that are able to process it. And just because you have to go back to therapy is not like, yeah, it's like an alcoholic that fell off the wagon, or
No.
I quit eating meat like 2 years ago. It's a whole nother story. But if I accidentally take a bite of a burger when I order like a Beyond Burger and it's meat, I'm not like, oh my god, I'm not a
Right.
vegetarian, I'm not a pescatarian anymore. I just had a bite of meat, like they slipped it in, like, oh no, now it's over, right? I don't know if that's a great analogy, but it makes sense to me, right? Like,
No, I get it. I get it. It's so true. There's just so many times in your life that you're going to need to go back and you're going to need to seek that treatment. You're going to need to seek that care. Maybe something new is going to manifest that triggers something else from before that you didn't even realize was such a problem, and maybe you're going to have to just handle that problem at the moment and do the best that you can. So And I want to get back to your story and kind of bring this full circle because I know we're coming at the top of the hour, but I'm at the point where you started doing the public speaking and you're about to retire. And then, number one, how many years before you got out? You said it was 2 years before you got out that you were doing the public speaking. Did you
Yeah.
go back and were you a boatsman's mate for like 4 or 5 years and then get out? Or did you just go back and you were at eight? How many years did you have to serve as a chief? Uh,
I did 2 years as a chief,
I see. Okay.
and I went to a, destroyer squadron, which I would say, when it was time to do work, it was time to do work, but my commodore was actually stationed with me, on the aircraft carrier, so he knew me in the wardroom, from the carrier, and so when I reported to the des run, he was very, very flexible with me, like, I flew out to Hawaii and talked to every submarine that was out there, Submarine 7, they had, the
Wow.
stand down, and I didn't have to take leave for that. And basically what I told him was, "Hey, look, I don't need money. I don't even need a rental car. I don't need a hotel. I'll stay on somebody's couch, man. Just
Right.
as long as I don't have to come out of pocket or take leave, like I'll come do this stuff." I would humbly say like the Navy should have retained me just for that,
Yeah.
because we pay so much money for these like speakers to come, and I've been, again, no hubris, but I've been approached about, opportunities to monetize this stuff, and it would kind of make me feel dirty. Like that's not the point, right? Like
Yeah.
the if I do that, then it kind of changes my motivation, right? And it would kind of corrupt it in some way in my mind.
I
Maybe
feel
other
the
people
same way
wouldn't think
about
of
my
it that
work.
way.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I understand.
Yeah,
I feel similar.
but as long as it didn't cost me anything, I was happy to do it. And I got to say that command was really cool about, letting me travel and speak to people. Uh, so that was a great way. I got to be honest, I was a little upset when I got orders to that command because I was thinking I was going to stay at Beach Group, which I really love that job. But then I got there and it was great. So there again, another thing to manage expectations, right? I had these expectations that it was going to be horrible, and I got
Mhm.
there. It was great. Like my Commodore was awesome, the job was awesome, and it afforded me the opportunity to do stuff like this to help sailors. And so I
Yeah.
I cannot, again, the obstacle is the way, right? The hardest thing, the most adversity you've gone through, it really turns into probably, or it should, uh, turn into something that you can use to help people and hopefully better yourself. I say this a lot, like I was a jerk, like I was cocky. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, I knew my stuff and I was good at operations, but I was a jerk. You know,
Right.
I, I judged people. I thought, I was better than everybody. I was smarter than everybody. And the reality is, I was not. I'm just a dude, just
Right.
like everybody else.
Like everybody else. Yep. Yep. So now you retire. And what were you thinking you would do next? And where did you end up?
So when I retired, I kind of panicked again, right? And I was like, "Oh my god, I don't know what to do." So I worked in the shipyard for like 6 months, and I, I appreciated the opportunity, but it didn't align with my value system.
Mhm.
So uh, there's a story there as well where I kind of got into it with a guy that told me he didn't care about my family on Easter Sunday, and my daughter, was very religious, got baptized. Like I was like, "Yeah, I'm not working Easter Sunday, buddy." So anyway, it was a good opportunity, but it wasn't a good
Didn't
fit.
work out.
Yeah, I was very stressed out, constantly on the phones. Good money at the time. They pay people because you're never going to have time to spend that money because you're always at work stressing out about stuff. And I just felt my anxiety creeping back up, so I quit that job. And then I still worked in ship repair for the last like 18 months for the Navy, and then with the government side. And then I recently transferred to the Board of Inspection and Survey uh, out of Little Creek. So that's what I've been doing for the last month and a half or so.
So are you like the inspectors that come to the ship? Or are you on the back end with the admin side of the in
No,
service?
yeah, I come to the ship. Yeah,
Ah,
yeah,
you're the people we dread to see.
yeah. I know. I went to the dark side. That's what everybody says. I'm like, well,
Oh, man.
you want a guy like me on the dark side. Trust me.
Oh,
Yeah.
in-serv is such a for you guys that don't know, aren't in the military, in-serv is like this just intensive inspection. I believe it happens even before you start your sea trials. It's like right after all your shipyard repairs. And it just basically top and down, front and back, every little nick, cranny, every test, everything that you can think to do, they come out and they inspect. So it's a very stressful time for the surface warfare community, but
It's important though.
maybe it
I
doesn't have to
feel
be.
yeah, yeah. I feel that this is in line with my value system, my virtues, right? And
Good.
you know, one thing I talk a lot about, and maybe it's a good way to kind of close out, but like for so many years, I worried about my reputation and my legacy, right? I say this all the time. If you just worried about your value system and your virtues, your
Mhm.
reputation and legacy would take care of itself. Like you don't need to worry about your reputation or legacy. Just be a good human. Be in line with your value system. Be in line with your virtues, and that's all you really. That's all. If you just focus on your character alone, everything else will take care of itself. Like you won't have to worry about what people are saying about you behind your back.
That is so true. I was just talking to somebody about this earlier today about understanding your values and which fights to take on, which ones don't, which you don't. And it really comes down to how much you value something. And if you value something hard enough, you have to see things through that sometimes that are painful. And I'm going through a personal struggle with that right now. So
Yeah.
it's so true. It really everything does come back to your values.
Yeah.
And when your values are out of whack, and if you value things like you said, like prestige or trophies, if those are your values, you're going down a very, very unsafe road, in my opinion.
Well, and there's
So,
no end to it.
mm. Oh yeah,
The rat race is always hiring.
oh
Yeah,
yes, yes. Once you get that trophy, then there's another trophy, then there's another trophy, and another trophy, and another one. So, oh my
absolutely.
gosh, Jeff, this has been such a pleasure. I just thoroughly enjoy talking to you. It's always wonderful when I talk to a kindred, like what I would call a like-minded or a kindred spirit such as yourself. So
Yeah, absolutely.
where can people find you if they'd like to connect with you? I know that you are starting up a new version of your podcast soon. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I had the Evolution podcast. I did that for about 3 years. I would humbly say it did pretty well. But again, as I look back through some of that, I wanted to do like a 2.0 version of the Evolution. That'll be launching January 1st. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn. So, if anybody needs to connect or wants to talk about stuff we talked about today, like I'm happy to do that. It's kind of my life's mission is to be of a net gain to anybody that comes into contact with me. I may not be able to solve all your problems, but I certainly won't take anything away. And if I talk about being Christ-like, whether you're a Christian or not, if you just try to walk the world Christ-like, good things come back to you. So that's just really what I try to do.
I agree. All right, Jeff, I'm going to go on full screen and meet you backstage just for a brief moment, but I do want to say thank you. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. That was an honor again.
All right. Hey guys, thanks so much. Hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday, wherever you are finding me and us, and have a great rest of your day. I will not be doing a show next week. I'm going on a cruise, so very excited about that. My first one since the pandemic hit. So I think that's going to be exciting. And we'll be trying to get another show going when I get back. But have an amazing rest of your day, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye bye now.